Hi everyone, and welcome to Game Music 101. We're a research group based at Queen's University, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how music works in video games, how it helps us emotionally connect to games, how it gives players cues, and how it communicates narrative and story during play. We approach these questions through ludomusicology, but also through game studies and media studies. Today is a really special episode for us because it's the first time we're welcoming a guest into this conversation, and we couldn't have asked for a better person to start with. We're joined today by Tharcisio Vaz, an award winning game and film composer, sound designer, researcher, and educator based in Brazil. He holds both a master's degree and a PhD in game music composition from the Federal University of Bahia, and over the past decade, he has worked on music and audio for more than 80 projects across games, film, and animation. His work sits right at the intersection of practice and theory, from composing and implementing music for games to researching how music shapes immersion, player experience, accessibility, and embodied cognition. He's perhaps best known for BREU audio game series, where sound and music are main components used for navigation, narrative, and play itself. It's a project that raises many of the same questions we care about here at Game Music 101 about emotion, meaning, immersion, and how players experience sound in games. Tharcisio, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. And so we have prepared some questions. I'm going to start with the question one. You work simultaneously as a composer, researcher, and an educator. So how do these roles inform one another in your approach to game music?
Yeah, so yeah, for me, um practice in theory, like it goes both ways, right? So there's a composer here in Brazil that he teaches. His name is Paulo Costa Lima, and he has a book that is like e Prática do Compor, Theory and Practice of Composition. And he talks about how theory and composition, theory and practice uh, is like very interlinked. It's almost like the same things. Like when you create a piece of music, you're creating theory, right? There's another composer, Fernando Cerqueira, and he when he talks about music composition, he says like when you create a piece of music, you're like creating a word. So it's a very interesting perspective. It's something I agree. And in my personal experience, I mean, sometimes people says like, oh, you do so many things at the same time. You teach, you compose, work on projects, this and that. But for me, it doesn't feel like I'm trying to do a lot of stuff, a lot of things at the same time. It feels like one thing is like connected to the other. It's like when I learn like whatever I learn experimenting in music composition, I tend to, okay, that sounds great. So let me analyze this. Oh, okay, I've used this and that. Okay, maybe I try applying this. If I want this effect, I want, maybe I'll try applying this more time. So I take these findings, and usually I transform this in a research. I write a paper about it, and then I share the findings with the students. Uh, so it could be the other way around. I could read a paper, an article. It's like, oh, that's a very interesting concept. Okay, let's put it to the test. Let's make a composition applying this concept. Let's listen. How would that sound? So that I usually I apply this in a composition, and I share the findings with the students as well. So for example, um, for instance, I was reading a paper of Candace Brower that she talks about musical schemas, the idea that the way we it's related to this idea of embodied music composition, embodied music cognition. Sorry, So he says like the way we perceive music, it's directly related to the way we perceive the world. Like we are in the world with our bodies, we interact with things. So, for instance, there's this schema of contention. If I grab this phone, for example, since a toddler, I can understand. I'm playing with this. I know that my hand it does not pass through this phone. The same way I'm in this room, I have four walls, a ceiling, a floor. So very early on, we understand some things just by interacting with the world with our bodies. And she talks about the idea the this scheme of source path go, for example. It's like if I'm sitting here and if I want to go through that door back there, this is my source point, and that's my goal, and that's my trajectory going there. I can go there and I can change my mind. Oh, actually, I heard a noise on the window. I go the other way around. So as she says, like somehow. This, for example, that can help us to grasp the notion of musical gesture, which was a concept that it took a lot of years for me to grasp. I maybe some composers can relate to that, but for me it was a very hard concept to grasp, like musically. So that helped me a lot. And it's interesting that she says like, oh, when you combine this, there are other schemas like musical schemas. You can like form like a musical narrative. It's like, oh, that's great. Maybe I could try apply this in game music and film music. So then I experimented that in a there was a composition there was a film music contest, and we had to compose a music for a script that so there wasn't like a movie. They didn't shoot a movie for that script specifically. So I was like, okay, I will put that to the test. I'll try applying this theory, and I relate to the narrative of the script, and I love the results. It's like, okay, definitely this is going to be part of my trade of tools, and I apply this concept. I love the result, and apparently the jury liked it as well. I got the second place. Great. So since then, I've kind of this concept's kind of ingrained in my DNA. So that's the way I usually treat music. Like I try to not view theory and practice as separate things. For me, it's just one thing. So the way I relate that to the teaching and researching side, it comes natural for me.
Right. So it's like an intertwined process of
Yeah, yeah.
different components.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Great, and that was really nice to hear. So the second question I have is that I was watching your 2025 demo reel, and
Mm,
what really struck me was how wide the range is. So many different styles, genres, and musical worlds. And yet across all of them, I could still recognize your signature as a composer. How do you move between such different projects while still sounding like yourself?
great. That's a great question. And I'm gonna start by thanking you. It's like it's always great when you work as a composer and people says like, "Oh, I can identify your style over there." So it's great. So thank you for that. And but answer your question, yeah, we I believe like everyone has a um his or her favorite genres, like, oh, this genre, this type of music I love to create. For instance, for me, it's not the only thing I like to create. I like to create like different stuff, but definitely if I could pinpoint some things, like I like when I get get the chance to create for a project that the music is kind of dark, mysterious, and horror stuff. I love it because I feel like it's a type of music that you get a lot of freedoms. Like you can play a lot with dissonance, it can be very experimental, but I think that versatility is part of the trade when you work with music for media. It's like we don't get the chance to. I mean, maybe for more established composers that like superstar composers, they can like, no, this is my style. I will only work with projects that resonate with this kind of genre and everything. But I believe that usually we composers we don't get uh, this luxury of like choosing like being like too picky about the projects we work on. So versatility is part of the trade, and for me, it's something very positive because we usually sometimes the projects we it doesn't we don't have we not necessarily have a lot of time to spend like experimenting with like maybe a new genre that we are not used to listen or to create it. So for me, it's a fun challenge to, okay, I just have this amount of time. I don't know, maybe a couple of months or even less to learn more about this genre and try to come up with something that it doesn't sound fake. It sounds something it's very interesting to hear for someone that's familiar with this genre. It doesn't sound like someone is trying to make something that's too off. And at the same time, like you said, and maintain my identity as a composer. Uh, it's not necessarily something that I am like over analyzing it, but I think naturally I'm I think I'm not speaking only like for myself, but I think composers usually go through that thought like in a very intuitive way. We tend to, okay, let's try to sound great, sound like me, but at the same time genuine. It's like it's not something weird and fake for someone that it's acquainted with type of genre with this music aesthetic. Don't know if
Right.
I answered well your question.
No, 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 that was great. Like, and that's exactly what I was looking for. Like, I was just looking at different compositions and I was thinking,
Hmm.
like, how can one move between all of these different genres and just like
Hmm.
still achieve that level of consistency and also like, style.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it happens. It happened to me last year, for example. I was composing. I started composing in a project that a friend worked on the first version of the game, so we get to work together on the second version. And before we started, we did like a video call, and he was like, "Okay, I'm gonna show you all the tools I use in this project. Okay, I've used these instruments, these samples, the style. I tended to go on this direction. Sometimes I was using this combination of instruments, so he was opening the sessions and everything. So we chat a lot about it, and but at the end it was fun because we managed somehow to create pieces of music that were similar, like in the ways like, hey, that sounds like it belongs to the world of this game, but at the same time, people could notice, okay, this this music it has like a different flavor from that one, like yeah, but it wasn't. It didn't sound like, oh, it's too off. It doesn't sound from the same game. It sounded like from the same game, but like different composers, like different perspectives. And since the game has like different worlds, you travel to very different scenarios. So it was great because we ended up having a lot of variety on the piece of music, and we got very good feedbacks from the players, and we also learned a lot from each other. Like we were like in the middle of the process, I was trying, I was not trying, I naturally mimic some of his musical quirkies and the same as him. So we did some uh, we are very flexible about some minor details of composition. So it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot on the process.
Great, thank you very much. So that takes us to the next question. Across your research, game music appears less as a soundtrack and more as a system. When did you begin thinking of composition for games as a dynamic designing process rather than writing traditional pieces?
Yeah. Well, I maybe it was this. Um, my training as a composer, I did my BA in music composition on Universidade Federal da Bahia. That's Northeast Brazil. And I had a lot of professors that they were they were very they would incentivize us a lot of analyzing music. Like, okay, take music from other composers, and when you analyze it, you can learn some concepts that could be interesting to apply in your own music. And there's a concept, there's a professor, he's now retired. He wasn't my professor, but my professors were very influenced by him. His name is Jamari Oliveira, and he came up with this idea of compositional problem. So he says like every time you're creating a piece of music, you have like a problem to solve. It's an interesting perspective. And for me, when I was starting studying game music, uh, for me that makes made a lot of sense because you have all these challenges. Like you're not sometimes you have to compose like linear music when in a cutscene, a piece of music that is very like it's synchronized to a scene, but sometimes most of time there's some interactivity, so the music is more like non-linear. You have to compose a seamless loop, and you have to be careful to not bore the player. It should not sound repetitive. Uh, so for me, it's great. It's like a fun challenge, and I believe I was watching a video from the composer Austin Wintory the other day. He was commenting on his winning on the Grammys, and he was talking about how challenging it is for a game music composer to at the same time create a piece of music that it works on the game. It's like it fits very well on the game experience, like considering the game design, the aesthetic of the game, the narrative and everything. um, and you come up with all those systems, loops, and transitions. Okay, it happens this on the game, then the music will have to make this transition if the player will put himself in a dangerous situation, this and that. So you came up with all these systems, triggers, tags, and everything that it triggers on middlewares and everything, which I love this type of stuff. I love it. But at the same time, you have to create an interesting linear linear listening experience for the player who wants to listen to the music on a platform such as Spotify. So yeah, uh, I usually when I start a project, s- usually very systematical. I like to play a lot the game and analyze it, understand what is the idea of the game, what kind of triggers, what kind of strategies I can try there, creatively speaking, technically speaking. But then I try to shut down my brain a bit and try to, okay, I understand how this game works, but now, okay, the system is well defined, but now let's try improvise some ideas, some themes, and then the pieces start. Uh, I can. can put all the pieces together. Like, so yeah, I'm very analytical, but I like uh, to rely a lot on my intuition as well. So
Yeah, that's great. So you spoke a lot about loops and like being linear, like in different formats, for example, OSTs or in the in-game music. I was wondering, like, we know that like the game music loops for long periods of play. From your perspective, are loops a compositional limitation, or are they one of the medium's unique expressive strengths?
yeah, I believe I almost like answered that on the previous question. Yeah, and the answer definitely will be no. I don't think it's a limitation. I think it's more like it's a strength, and for me it's like a fun challenge. Like I was saying before, it's like for me it's the idea of the compositional problem I was talking about before, and for me it's like uh it's very rewarding to come up with like it gives me a lot of pleasure, like almost at the same level when I'm improvising like some musical ideas and I stumble upon like an interesting themes, like okay, that could work as a main theme of the game. uh but at the same time when I came up with an interesting system, or when I make a very seamlessly loop, like it gives me a lot of pleasure. When I experimenting with stuff like, okay, the loop is seamlessly, but maybe the project doesn't have like a great budget, so I can make like longer pieces of music, because in order to avoid repetitive too many repetitions, right? On a music piece, like the most obvious solution would be just compose longer pieces of music, right? So you won't repeat as many times. But that's not always the case. We get the opportunity to compose very long pieces of music because that impacts on budgets, and sometimes the budget is a little bit strict. So it's fun to come up with solutions like, okay, the loop is seamlessly, but it's repeating too many times. So, how about we take some musical phrases and randomize that on the middleware. So even if I have like a very short loop of I don't know, like 30 seconds, 1 minute, how about I take some phrases, and every time it repeats, it plays with a different instrument, so you get like a different flavor. And maybe sometimes you play with instrument A, then B, then A, B together. So I love to play with this kind of stuff. So for me, definitely it's not like a limitation. Everything related to loops, repetitions, and all uh, this very particular aspects about game music composition, for me it's a pleasure to play with this type of things.
Great. That's how I feel exactly about the loops as well. And regard like we were speaking about loops, and we know that loops kind of like affect how temporality feels in games. So when I mean, I guess my question is, when we're really absorbed in a game, time can feel like it stretches or kind of disappears. I was wondering, like, how do you think the music shaped that feeling of time for players, especially in immersive or suspense-driven experiences like audio games?
Yeah, that's a great question. I um there's this there's a book of Jonathan Kramer, The Time of Music, and I was talking about the Candace Brower paper and everything, and this was one of the books that really was really interesting, and I absorbed it a lot. So Kramer talks about uh, this idea of how the perception of time is very subjective when we are listening to music. So he talks a lot about how music is capable of molding our perception of time. So he talks a lot about the absolute time. It's like when you're just counting seconds, no, with the time watch, whatever. But you have also the musical time. So there are a lot of different types of time. The vertical time, the static time, the the concept of linearity, non-linearity. So it's very interesting. It's interesting that when you're reading his book or reading the Kenneth Brower paper that I was just referring a couple of questions ago, sometimes it feels like you're reading like something that is philosophical, but it's great. It's very interesting because some concepts of music seem to be very simple, but when you're creating music, it's very hard to grasp. So sometimes it's interesting. Uh, that's one thing I find it great, this perspective of the embodied cognition, because it's a way to face music theory, but taking into account the perception of the listener. So it's great. So in the case of game music, it's like the player. So it makes a lot of sense to me because we are only when we create stuff, we have these intentions, but not necessarily okay. I wanna I want to create this type of experience for the player. Okay, I want to create a combination of notes and rhythms to create this idea that the player it's like the time is static. It's like the time is not passing by. Uh, but yeah, we have this intention, but we can only know when the players it's interacting with the game and you ask questions and everything. So on BREU, for example, the BREU Shadow Hunt, uh, I during the exploration, like when you play with this blind character, Marco, who's looking for his grandfather. So his grandfather is missing. You have to explore different areas. So when you're exploring and interacting with different objects, I try to create this idea of static time. So the idea was to create a lot of long notes. Not, I try to be very, let's say, economical with musical rhythm, just like long notes, a lot of pauses, so the player could listen a lot to the environment. Because the idea is to for the players like, okay, let me take a long breath and okay, let me hear what's around me, what objects can I interact, and also there's dialogues is very important. So if I would uh, create a piece of music with a lot of written information that could distract the player maybe from the game. But on the other hand, there are times where creatures are chasing after you. So it's the opposite. I was creating a lot of fast notes, a lot of rhythmic activity to create this urgency on the players. Like, okay, you have to run. So like concerning time perception, the idea was to during exploration, the player feels like okay, time's like frozen, is static. But on the other hand, like on the during the chasing scenes, like okay, time is passing by. I have to run. So to create this sense of urgency with music, and then I think I managed to achieve that goal. But yeah, it depends, of course, on each player's references, experiences, the cultural references, and everything. This is very subjective. I know. I can we compose a piece of music and we can only hope that the listener is going to interpret that the way we intended to.
Yes, absolutely. I was playing BREU,
Hmm.
and As you mentioned, there are like exploration scenes, and there are also chase scenes, and I could
Hmm.
feel the difference in temporality as I was kind of like trying to focus. And
Hmm.
yes, it was very. I mean, I guess as you mentioned, it was very stark. The difference was very stark.
Nice. Great to hear.
Of
Thank you,
course.
Javi.
And
Yeah.
so the next question I have is that in your Cuphead study, you used EEG data to investigate immersion. What did neuroscience reveal about the player's experience that traditional game music analysis often can't capture when it comes to immersion?
Yes. Yeah, that is kind of related with the thing I was just talking about, uh, which is this idea that EEG really helps us um, when you're creating music and creating a research that relies on EEG. The thing is, usually musical analysis uh, tend to rely maybe too much. Like it's very common for musical analysis to rely on musical pitch and harmony, and that's important. That they really can inform us a lot about the music composition, why it sounds the way it sounds. But it's for me what is interesting about EEG. It's not that, oh, EEG is better. No, for me it's like all the possible ways you can analyze a piece of music. It's great, and I think every 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 type of analysis has its own merit. And for me, the ideal scenario is to combine everything so you can gather as much information as you can. So EEG is great for when you do an experiment with EEG. You can take that piece of music and put it to so the player can the player or the listener can listen to it, and you can ask questions about the person. For instance, like, oh, I'm doing analysis about a tonal music, and I'm analyzing, I mean, the maybe like the dominant chords and the way it adds tension to the music. So one way is like take that piece of music and you can map, okay, you can find all these dominant chords on this bars, and you have the tension here, resolution here, this and that, blah blah. But then you can ask the listeners like, okay, when do you feel tension on this music? It's like you can ask some things, but that's great also. But sometimes, for instance, I'm doing this research where people is playing BREU, and I ask some questions prior and after the test. That's great. I got some interesting questions, but at the same time, it's like, okay, but when you even if I don't ask like verbally, I handle people a piece of paper where it says like, oh, for example, in a scale from 0 to 10, how immersed you think you were during the experience. It's a tricky question because maybe not everyone will be very honest about it. Maybe there'll be people that hated the game experience, but they're like, oh, but I don't. The researchers right here, the composers, like, oh, I don't want to hurt his feelings, so yeah, I just said it was okay, it was great. So EG, uh, it's more accurate because you can watch like the brain activity, and even though and you can add that to the answers. And it happens sometimes that people says like uh it's tricky because sometimes people are like interacting with the game, and their facial expression is like this, like, oh, what do you think about the game? Yeah, it was okay, it was fine. And then when you look at the EG, his or her brain's like popping up. It's like, oh, and he was really, apparently he was really enjoying the experience. So I think it's an interesting way uh, try to be more even more accurate. Like it's another layer you can do, like besides like analyzing music, asking people about their listening experience, and then you get the EG. So that's my perspective. It's great to get like further information, and sometimes you can have uh, some interesting insights you couldn't get just by asking people or just by analyzing the music itself.
My next question is that you've written a lot about the challenges of making audio only games, but I'm curious, what do you think audio only games actually do better than audio visual games?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that it does better. It's just different. But what is very interesting about creating music for an audio game is that since you don't have the visual support, I believe you have to be more conscious about the the musical ideas, the musical material you're putting in the game. So you have to be like even in film, like it's everyone knows that dialogue is king, right? You should never step on dialogue's toes. And in games, the same thing. But I feel like when you're creating music for an audio game, that is even more critical because you do not have like a visual support. You do not have like the lip sync of the character. You do not have subtitles, anything. So you, I believe you should be even more clear about more conscious about what are the functions the music is doing in the game. So in the uh, for instance in Breu's case, music is there to support the game's narrative and specifically to uh, trying to communicate Marco with the main character, the Marco's emotions, how he feels about his grandfather's missing, and sometimes, I mean, the actors who work with us, they were great, amazing. You could feel a lot of tension in their. So the music was following that and enhancing the emotions the actors were bringing themselves, and sometimes hinting some reactions and emotions that maybe wasn't clear enough just by listening to the cutscene, for example. Um, and also, but at the same time, yeah, and you have to be, like I said before, very economical. Like the amount of notes you put in is like it's you have to be very conscious about the natural pauses on the dialogue where music could like uh occupy like more space or not, and at the same time talking about the system thing that we were talking about before. It's interesting because for instance in BREU I was talking about before, there's this game stage like the exploration and the chasing parts where the creatures are running after you. So if you don't have the visual support, the music should communicate that to the player as well. So there's all these game design aspects of the game that the music should definitely help communicating. So the music also um, can help like informing the game form, the game sections for the player, right? To make clear, okay, this is exploration part. Okay, oh, okay, now creature, there's this tag indicate, okay, that creature is running after you, watch out. Okay, there's this other tag signalizing, okay, chasing is over. Okay, you can relax again, go back to your exploration. And on the Braille Shadow Hunt is the second version of the game. On the first version, we were even more experimental about it because uh, on the first version, we were crazy enough to to create a 3D experience audio game where it could go every direction. So, for instance, on that game, I came up with I call it like a directional music system. So the idea is like we recorded for string quartet and piano. So the idea was like if I okay, if I have like a door back there in a game, I'm facing like the opposite direction. I'm just listening to one instrument. It's like the cello, and as I turn around and I get closer to the right angle, which is back there, I start listening to the other instruments. So I have the cello here. It's like okay, viola, violin two, violin one, piano. So on the game narrative, the character Marco says like, oh, when I when I listen to the piano in my head, it's like hearing my grandfather's voice. So I know I'm in the right direction. So we did that to because we played a lot of audio games and we felt like audio games tend to use a lot of um, like interfacial sounds. So it's and some how do you call that? Some text to speech voiceover, like synthetic voiceover. Yeah, that's great because sometimes you have to communicate something to the player, but we felt like okay, but the narrative is very important, and when you put this kind of synthetic voices, it kind of breaks a bit the immersion. So we okay, let's try some way to focus on the narrative, and we have only this text to speech voiceovers only when the player pauses the game and he wants to tweak like the settings of the game. So we were music played a huge part on that like these experimentations. So that's the thing that I yeah, I doubt I would go to that path. It was if I was just working a traditional type of game like a visual game. So that's the thing that I think is it's great about audio games, but not to say it's better. It just forces you to go different. You have like different problems to solve. I was talking about the compositional problem. You have some specific problems to solve that it's really interesting for the creativity forces you to go to different directions like musically.
Right, and that I think greatly answered the question that I had next, which I
Hmm.
was thinking that like in BREU, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it
Yeah,
correctly.
BREU. A lot of people said brew, but it's fine. It's BREU.
Bro, yes, Bro Shadow
Uh-huh.
Hunt. I
Uh-huh.
felt like the music kind of acted like a connective tissue between like,
Hmm.
different scenes, like chase scenes, dialogue heavy moments, and back into like a spatial navigation. And I think you explained how like, that works for like,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
for like a game that is an audio game.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, yeah. I uh yeah, I'm thinking if maybe there's something that I didn't mention before. Uh yeah, but on top of everything I just said, at the same time, since it's like a narrative game, um I it's like I mentioned before. At the same time, I when I work in a game, I like to play a lot of the game, understand its nature, the way the game works, understand the plot, the narrative, and all different interactions you have, like the game design system and everything. Uh, when I'm creating the music, when I'm improvising ideas and finding the themes, I like to I try at least to when I come up with a theme, a musical theme that I think it works, I try to somehow make it spread that theme all over the game music composition, even if it's something subtle. But I like to create like a main theme that people could recognize all over the game. Could be like a very simple motif, like a leitmotif, like the Wagner's idea. Um, and it could be something else, like maybe a combination of instruments or something. But usually I try to have like a collection of notes that I spread all over the music composition. And BREU is like that. If you play like the from the menu of the game, the first cutscenes, when you get to the final cutscenes, like, oh, I think I heard that theme before. So I like that. But I mean, but it's funny because at the same time I tried to do that, I've heard some uh that game I mentioned before. I work with another composer. It's like, man, you put so many ideas on in a short piece of it. The developer was telling me that it's like it's interesting. You put so many ideas in a short period of music. It's like, yeah, but that's not good, right? No, actually love it because it feels like there's a lot of to listen to. It feels like every time you listen to the piece of music, you spot something new. It's like, okay, if you like it, great. I'm happy.
Great. Yes. Regarding Peru, I was wondering that you are very careful with cultural references in this game, especially using Brazilian instruments without turning them into stereotypes. So how conscious were you of that balance while you were composing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in film music, there could be in music for media in general. It's not uncommon to have um some common practices. People someone could say like, oh, this is like a stereotype, but I don't know. I'm calling common practices. For instance, like there's some associations we tend to do, like for instance, like it is expected in a film of like a science fiction film to hear some synthesizers, stuff like that, and it's expected like it, but it doesn't mean that the composer will not have a lot of freedoms. Like there's always room for uh like for his or her own style. But there's some stereotypes that I was like, yeah, I was, for instance, like in Braille, I was using some percussion instruments from north of Brazil, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to sound too like tribalistic. It's like I was associating some percussion instruments and some wind instruments with the forests and the creatures. I was like, yeah, but I don't want to sound too much like tribalistic or something. It's like, yeah, people might get the wrong idea. It's like, is as the creatures were, I don't know, maybe too animalistic or inferior or whatever. So, but one, yeah, so I try to, I make some creative choices, but I've tried to be as respectful I could, um, and try not to follow these stereotypes. And one of the things I did a lot of research. It was a coincidence, like during the like right on the beginning of the developing of the game, I took the chance to visit some family in Manaus. Manaus is it's in the state of Amazonas, so the heart of Amazonia. So I get to chance to visit a tribe over there and watch some watch some musical rituals. I got the chance uh, to chat with them a bit. I bought some instruments there. I met a percussionist from Pará, which is the like the neighbor state, right? Um, and um, so I invited him to participate on the project. I sent him a lot of some mock-ups, some sketches, and when we got the time to record, like in studio and everything, so he was doing a lot of improvisation. So we tested like many different instruments from the region, and he was born there. So I yeah, so I felt more. I I I I've created some stuff with the instruments I got there, but I was like, I was not so sure. But when I showed him, he's like, yeah, it's great. It makes a lot of sense. But also, when you take this rhythm you created, you could do also this and that. That's cutting ball. We could mix these things and that. So I think that helped me to involving him on the project and doing this type of research, traveling there that helped me somehow to sound more authentical and maybe not sound too um, um, too stereotypical, right? About it. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion because it relates to the question you made back there about about how do you compose for so many different styles, and we were talking about versatility. It's part of the trade of being a composer, but at the same time, depending on the project, sometimes it's a good idea to invite people to work with you to make sure that people that are more knowledgeable than you about this specific style, this specific instruments you're using, to make sure that sounds great. It sounds original, great, and yeah, and it's respectful at the same time. Because there's a lot of discussion about, for instance, like Orientalism, like composers that are just using some I don't know, harmonic minor scales, stuff like that. It's like, oh, that's music from from the Eastern cultures, and yeah, but it can sound very stereotypical. I mean, sometimes you play a game and watch the movie, say, yeah, that works, but was that the best way to interpret that culture, like a movie or a game that it's set on Turkey, maybe Egypt? I don't know, like a different country is like, yeah, I don't know. It's a good discussion, but someone might disagree with me. It's like, oh, I still think it sounds stereotypical, and that's okay. I think it's a good discussion, and I'm open to learn more about it, and because it's very common for us to, like, the projects can vary a lot, and it's very common for us to have to interpret music from another culture that we are not very familiar with. Even though in my case it was inside Brazil, but Brazil is huge, right? And so if I and in the this case that I was referring to instruments and some to music from indigenous tribes, so I was like, yeah, let's make sure we do it in a great way. At least maybe it won't sound great for some people, but at least it doesn't sound disrespectful.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And even my next question is very related to that. In your recent research on AI and music, you're very attentive to questions of cultural identity, especially risk of flattening local traditions like those from northeastern Brazil. And how do you think composers can work with AI in a way that supports cultural memory rather than erasing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I mean, I've been very resistant with the use of AI, but lately I've been experimenting AI on different scenarios. Um, Sometimes to maybe to use in addition to regular research on Google and other platforms. Okay, let me try to find further references about this subject. Let's see if AI can find me like new books and papers, articles I couldn't find by myself. Anyway, so lately I've been finding newer uses of AI, but to be honest, I for music making, maybe I'm biased because I'm a composer myself. But yeah, I haven't been I still haven't found an AI that's it's good enough or useful for this media for music creation. I have found some AI tools that are great for specific genres of music, like pop music and specific genres. I have found some stuff that is wow, that's very interesting. Uh, but I had some interesting experiences for instance, once I was invited uh to be a mentor in a game jam. It was in Northeast Brazil as well, but it was in Maceió, a different state. And it was interesting because they invited me to help the teams to create sound effects and music for the games. And uh, there were some teams that uh, they did demand more my attention. I could help them more, and and it was great because there are some people that had like zero knowledge of music, and they still were able to create something interesting that really fit the game experience and sounded great. And one of these teams won the game jam. Yay! Great. But there were other teams there were um, very focused on programming and the visual aspects of the game. So uh, when their deadline was very short, then it's like, oh yeah, we have to do some sound and music. So when they call me, they, yeah, we didn't have much time. They were like, oh, some other mentors were suggesting using AI. It's like, oh, okay, what the heck? Let's try using the AI then. And it was interesting because we tried so many different AIs. One of the AIs we tried was Suno, which is one of the best, I believe, we have today. And it was interesting because since the games they were producing were very specific, like they were doing, for instance, like pixel art style games that was with they were portraying a lot of landscapes of Maceió, their state, like gorgeous beaches, lighthouses, and everything. So I, when we were discussing about the options, like one of the ideal creative paths would be okay, maybe we could create something using like chiptune, like 8-bit music, so it can it can fit well with the art style you're producing. But yeah, but maybe it would be great to reference some rhythms, yeah, and some instruments that are common, like and with in pieces of music and genres you listen here, music genres. But we even if on the prompt we were like, okay, create a piece of music for this game. This is the main plot of the game, and this is the art style we're using. This um, pixel art style. So I want some chiptune and this and that. And I wasn't at the point we weren't even asking to do something specific of the region. Just like, okay, just create uh, a chiptune 8-bit type of music that sounds very vibey in this game that you have like gorgeous beaches. uh, and the AI couldn't figure out a way of reproducing like chiptune music. Uh, the only reference the AI had about chiptune music was like very fast pacing music. Uh, I don't know, like I'm trying to remember like a game that is very fast paced with the anyway with chiptune music, but it was very flat. It doesn't matter. It won't matter if I would say no, just create me a piece of music like which is like slow paced, something that you just uh, we were looking for something, maybe something like it's not necessarily chip tune, but that vibe like do you know hyperlight driven those soundscapes, but that with 8-bit tones would work perfectly. So we tried to write the prompt so many ways, but we couldn't, like the AI couldn't understand. So yeah, it's tricky. And the on the research I'm doing right now, I created an AI version with pieces of music of BREU, and no matter how specific I was, I try like 5 different AI tools, and no matter how specific I was about, okay, you have a game, it's a thriller game, you have this story, you have the main character, he's looking for his missing grandfather, and there's these creatures in a wandering in the woods, blah 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 blah. Okay, create a piece of music that uses this specific instrumentation, longer notes, some pauses, this and that, blah blah blah. The AI couldn't figure out. There was even AI creating some like very like something that sounds just electronic music, no strings, something that it's it fits more into a club than in a game. I mean, it's a mess. So I tried like 5 different AIs, and the one that is like, okay, this is coming closer. But even though like the we were talking about the loops and everything, if I would say, okay, this style might work, okay, but now create a, musical length of like 2 minutes and 36 seconds because that's the duration of the cutscene. The AI couldn't figure out. And if I say, okay, this music works, but create me a seamless loop, the AI couldn't figure out how to do it. So yeah, so we're still not there. For me, having like a new tool uh, to experiment, it's always exciting. But AI still, I still haven't found a way to use AI in the creative process of music for media. Not yet. I wish maybe I'll get there, or maybe the tools are not uh yeah are not perfect yet. And I'm not sure if I want it to be perfect. I mean, it's it's tricky.
Yes, I know. It just kind of brings up a lot of questions about ethical use of AI and how much
Yes.
like it uses samples from other composers to actually
Yeah.
kind of like train its kind
Yes.
of algorithm. Yes, yes.
Yes. True. True. It's a tricky question. It's tricky matter.
Yes, and like circling back to the game BREU, I was wondering, like after working on BREU, do you feel composing for audio-only games permanently change how you think about composing for any game, like even for visual games?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Because as I was mentioning before, the fact you don't have visuals in a game, I believe you have to be even more conscious about okay, what's the purpose of music? Uh, wh- um, what type of music do you want for this game segment? And how this music show works and why? It's like all like working in an audio game, since the audio came more to the forefront of the things, like since the audio had to um take uh more roles, let's say, like the audio has to be um more present in the game. I had to be much more conscious about the functions of music in the game. That really changed my perspective, and it made me more conscious about the space you must leave in the auditorial spectrum for the other stuff, right? For the other layers, like especially dialogue, but also sound effects as well and ambiences. And for me, it's very fascinating games like, for instance, um, Control. It's a game that I love the music for the game, but for 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 a game like Control, um, there's not like a there's not like a fine line between music and sound design. Like this line is very blurred, and I think that's fascinating. But at the same time, I understand that this is not the type of it kind of refers a bit to the discussion of Austin Winter. Is that maybe it's like a soundtrack of Control, maybe it's not the type of soundtrack that would win like a game awards. Usually the types of soundtracks that win like game awards for best score usually are those huge cinematic type of scores, very melodic, and but but sometimes but usually yeah, but we have to, not sometimes, we always, I believe, we have to prioritize what works for the game. It's like for instance, I've heard a lot of and even some close friends. I've watched a lot of people, for example, criticizing, for example, the soundtrack of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And for me, it's a genius soundtrack, but it's very minimal. It it's suits to create like a very relaxing type of experience. And for me, it grates. It wants me. It makes me want to explore the musical world like even harder. It's like, so yes. So creating music for an audio game made me more conscious about these things. Okay, what the game really needs. Do you need to put like 200,000 notes? Okay, maybe that sounds great. I've watched the other day a video about someone says like, "Oh, let's talk about creating music for games." And so the person took a game, is like, "Okay, let's create in real time a music for that game." And the end result is like, "Okay, this music sounds great, but yeah, I don't think it works for the game because there's I mean, clearly on the game you're exploring like in a very chill way, but yeah, a lot of themes going here and there, a lot of gestures. It's like, okay, what did happen on the game for you to make such bold move? Like, yeah, anyway, I'm more on the Austin side, like, okay, prioritize what the game needs, even if you have to be more economical. And if you manage to somehow create a piece of music that perfectly matches the game experience and also make a great piece of music that works like listening on Spotify, great, even better. But if you have to choose, prioritize the game experience, even if the music is very subtle and everything. I think maybe for some composers, maybe that could be something like a ego things, like, oh, it maybe feels like I didn't compose enough. There's too much silence, too many empty spaces. But anyway, so circling back to the answer, yes, audio games definitely help me to understand. Okay, music should be in this spot, not overtopping sound effects, much less dialogue. And okay, this music, it's here. I and here, okay, I could use silence. Sometimes silence is even more effective than a piece of music, right? So okay, this music is here because it's doing this thing. That's the goal is this, and I did on this way. I use that much of notes. I use the theme on this way. Use this combination notes for this reason. So yes, so it made me more conscious about my musical choices.
Great. That was like such a fascinating answer, and it made me also realize, like, as you mentioned, there are some games that have very subtle music, but like that subtle music matches the rhythm of the game. And I mean, honestly, I wouldn't want that to be changed as a player.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
So, let's just go back to the questions regarding education and music. You taught a lot of about game music in both industry-oriented courses and in academic programs. Based on the experience, what do you think game music education still hasn't figured out yet?
Okay. Yes. So, game music is something that is very new, right? Okay, we had like the first games on the 50s, 60s, but I think like game audio and especially uh the way like the resources we have today to create music, this is very new, right? And we had so many technological leaps and changes in a very short period of time. Uh, as opposed to film music, there I feels like there's like something that it's a medium that has like over 100 years, and maybe the technological leap wasn't as abrupt as game music. So yeah, for me, it's understandable that uh, game music creation methodologies are maybe not as consolidated as film music. And not saying that creating music for film is easy, definitely not. But there's, but at the same time, there's a lot of complexity in creating music for games, right? And I had some interesting experiences, like uh, both like teaching people that had a lot of experience as players. Like I teach in a digital games course at the university. So there's a lot of students that have like a decent knowledge of game design, but not necessarily have experience like creating music. And at the same time, I've taught in uh, musical colleges where you had like composers that had a lot of knowledge on music, but not necessarily on game design. They're like, oh, the last time I played a game was on Atari, like 20 something years ago. So there are some cases like that. And it's interesting that um, the students from the digital games that had a lot of knowledge from game design, even though they weren't able to create like fancy music with a lot of layers, this and that, but it's very interesting. It's like very often I see students that never created a piece of music before, and just with very basic knowledge of theory, and align that with their experience as game designers, they managed to create uh, is, uh, very interesting pieces of music that, even though it sounds simple, but it matches very well the game experience. On the other hand, the experienced composers, they create very interesting pieces of music, but as the example I was telling before, it kind of it doesn't necessarily match the experience. So it's hard to it's not easy to teach someone like both things, like okay, how music can integrate well with the game experience, and how the music can be very integrated with the all the game design aspects of the game, the narrative, and etc. And at the same time, it sounds interesting by itself. It's a great piece of music. It's not an easy task. The so for me, I try to take like the best practices I can gather from colleagues. There are composers that have teaching experience as well. Maybe some ideas that I take on books and everything, and I mix and match everything with my own experience. So what I and sometimes I tweak a bit the methodologies. I do some experimentation. My students are my guinea pigs sometimes. So what I try to do is to combine like different methodologies. Like I try to teach some different concepts related to music and game theory, and then we apply this on the analysis of a game. I usually we I bring like different games with like open code for people to like Unity games or Unreal games. So we can play like with different games, and we choose like a specific game. Okay, I like this one better. It's like we do like a voting, and we take that game, we analyze this game and all the possibilities. Okay, where should you put music here? What do you think? Oh, I put here. Oh, everywhere. Why? Should be a place where you use silence instead of music. Yes or no? Why? How? So when we answer these questions, and there's no right answer, right? So everyone has come up with his her own answers. Then we start composing. So like everyone's like composing like a different version. Sometimes we get the luxury of having instrumentalists like so performers, so we can record the pieces of music. So it's a lot of fun. Then we implement that on a middleware, and I teach a bit about how the middlewares work and everything. We implement that. Then we play and we implement on the game engine. So I show step by step and put the students to do it. And we play the game and discuss the results. So it's for me, it's at the moments it's like when I get the chance to do that in a subject, I in a digital games course, there's usually there's not as much game audio subjects, right? Because you have like game design, game production, game art, programming, all this sort of stuff. So I try to uh, I try to take those subjects and try to create a very broad and complete experience for the students. Okay, you learn a bit of theory, you analyze things, you create, and you play and see how everything comes together. So that's been working great for me, but definitely as uh, being aware that the game media medium is always changing all the time, and the game development tools, game audio tools are changing and improving, getting new features all the time. So I'm always reviewing that approach to make sure maybe there's something different we can do. And it's interesting that after doing the play test, and it's great when the students do like a final seminar, which is like a play test, and they show the final results, and everyone plays everyone's version of the game, and everyone comments, "Oh, I like your version of music makes me creates a sense of urgency in me on the game, but my colleague here made a version that it creates a more chill experience." Like, so we chat about it. It's fun. And also I didn't do that yet, but we could put like another layer, on the play test, we could invite people from other courses, like outside of the class, to play it, and we could use the EEG and maybe analyze data later. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of possibilities we can explore in that. When you combine music and interactivity, you can do a lot of experiments. For instance, I did a couple of times. One of the times I did on the University of Liverpool, we did like there was this event about music and interactivity. So there were people all over the world, and at the time, I've just finished the first version of BREU, and I prepare like a special version with the programmer where the people where you had like a visual interface for the musicians where they could watch like the player's path, and there were some triggers that was telling them to play certain passages that were indicated on the score. So in practice, the audience was listen to the game experience, like the dialogues and sound effects and everything, but the music was played like in real time by the ensemble. So yes, I believe that definitely there's a lot of room for experimentation in game music. And you asked before, it's like, oh, you see as a limitation, the loops, everything. No, definitely not. I see as an opportunity to take like different creative approaches. It's like since we have this interactive medium, we can face the music experience in a totally different way than the other mediums, even like music for films, for instance, like which is like the closest our cousin in the music creation uh, environment. So yeah, that's it, I guess.
No, great. That was a fantastic answer, like before. So that brings us to the final question, and this is like a tricky one. What's a question you wish people would ask you about your work but rarely do?
Yeah, that's a good that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if I had like a specific question for my work, but uh, it's something that it would be interesting to see someone asking something was like, I mean, for us that work with game music, it's a very obvious answer, but it's like, why study in creating game music? It's like, what's really fascinating about it? Because I'm saying also that because it's interesting that for people that are not used to, I have a lot of colleagues like fellow composers and people that study music with me. They're not really gamers. Uh, the other day I just met a guy from LA. I was like playing tennis. Is like he's like, oh, do you play tennis as well? Blah blah. Blah. And it's like, oh, what do you do? Blah blah. And it's interesting when it says like, oh, you work creating music for games. People that are not used to play games, they either think like you're creating music for, I don't know, like Fortnite, or maybe creating like sheep tunes. So it's a very uh, they usually have a very narrow perspective of what is like creating music for games. Why did you choose that, and why do you get so excited about it? So yeah, maybe that could be one question.
Yes, that's also like a question that I would love other people to ask myself because I'm also doing research on music of video games, and
Uh-huh.
most of the times when I discuss that with other colleagues who are not from like music departments or
Uh-huh.
from our program, they are like they have a lot of follow-up questions, like what type
Uh-huh.
of music you're working on, what type of
Uh-huh.
research you're doing, and like how can, and I mean like they are even shocked that there is like an area of research like
Uh-huh.
ludomusicology that kind of
What's
like
there to study?
yes.
Why bother about researching about game music? It
Exactly,
isn't just
exactly.
blips and bloops. Why bother? Why bother studying about it? Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
People don't get it. It's like and it's the thing we were discussing is like it's an very it's since it's a very new um uh study field. It's like there's so many avenues to explore, and every year you can see so many interesting games being launched and like exploring like uh, different venues, especially on the indie side. Like people get very crazy experimental. Um, I always get like find myself surprised with all the ingenious ideas people have like in game jams and in games in general. Because triple A's it's you there's a lot of money involved, so you have to be more. It's like you you don't you usually you don't get to be as experimental as on the indie side, right? It's natural. I understand. It's a monetary thing, so I totally get it. But yeah, that's it. Um, so I'm getting lately very into like tennis, and I was like I was thinking like it's interesting like it's totally like a quirky question like people could ask something like oh why do are so interested about tennis? What tennis can teach you about music studying, game studying? But I'm joking. But it's interesting uh, how hyper focused you usually are as musicians. Like music tends to favor a lot this hyper focus because oh it's a very complex thing and broad and you have to study all the time, especially for people who study like an instrument. You have to do it every day, blah blah blah. And it's great to do something outside music to do this reboot in our mind, but also like doing sport. Like I'm playing horrible tennis lately. I'm terrible at it, but it's great how helps us to it's a very technical sport, so it teaches us a lot about discipline, like consistency. So it's interesting to see like how um, stuff we learn in music can relate that and the other way around. I'm like that all the time. When I learn something new, I try to connect with something I already know. But anyway, that's just me.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Are there any closing remarks you'd like to share with us?
No, yeah, I just want to thank you again for the invitation. It was a lot of fun. Uh, and so I talked too much, so I'll probably give you a hard time on the editing, but I had a lot of fun, and it's for me uh it's uh it's great to have this opportunity to talk about game music, about our own experiences, because yes, I learned a lot about it, and I'm a big fan of the Game Musical 101. So yeah, it's an honor to be here. So thank you very much again for the invitation. Looking forward to watch the other interviews are going to follow up. Yeah, so thank you very much again, and congratulations to you and Dr. Lin for this amazing initiative. We definitely need more channels as yours. It's great. So thank you very much again, Hamid.
Of course. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today, and we really hope that like we can do further collaborations with you, whether it's on research or like other types of interviews in the future.
Yeah, definitely. We should. Yeah. And please keep me updated about your PhD work. I'm looking forward to read it. And yeah, it would be my pleasure to do collaborate with something with you guys. So thank you
Of
very much
course.
again, Hamid.
And thank you everyone who joined us. Stay tuned for more videos, conversations, and interviews on Game Music 101.